He recently retired from his position as CIO from the region of Peel, who really has been one of the real drivers behind service mapping in Canada. I'd like to welcome you all to today's presentation. We are extremely pleased to have an opportunity to present today what is going to be a very interesting and a very timely presentation on the City of Toronto's Core Services Review. And before I turn it over to Craig and Glenn, I just want to thank them for their time and an effort that they put into this session, and draw your attention to one of the key connections between the work of KPMG at the City of Toronto and the use of service mapping as a very strategic tool and exercise that lends itself to a variety of applications, strategic applications, but in this instance has been used by the City of Toronto as part of the Core Services Review. With that, I'm going to now turn it over to Craig and Glenn, who are standing by, and I'll just get our coordinator, Robert, to switch over, turn the mic over to them, and the presentation to them. The last thing I will say is we will be using the format of the chat box in the WebEx as a means of allowing individuals to pose questions. We will have 20 minutes at the end for questions, so please submit your questions, and I'll keep a note of those, and we'll pass those on to Craig and Glenn at the end of the session. Thanks very much.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Craig Fossey, and I'm partner in charge of our public sector practice here at KPMG. Thank you very much, Guy and Robert, for the introduction, and thank you to ICCS for the opportunity to present to all of you folks. KPMG over the summer months had the pleasure of working with the City of Toronto in its core services review project, generated a lot of heat and generated, I think, a lot of light in terms of looking at facts related to various services and programs. So today we really wanted to review the experience that we had working on the core services with you, take a look at the methodology that we employed, talk about some of the key success factors for such a project, and really provide an opportunity for you to ask questions and learn more about how the method might be of value in other areas. On the third page of our presentation, just some broad and general comments. Of course, fiscal sustainability is in the news on a daily basis with our European friends, our American friends, and really it's interesting that we in Canada are starting to turn our attention to some of the fiscal pressures that we are experiencing. I would say that, through this and any number of other projects, certainly there is a spending gap, there is a need to address it, and this is one tool among a number of different levers or approaches that can be exerted to address these challenges. Always difficult and tough choices, but certainly solutions exist around government spending challenges. In the next page of the presentation, feel free to take a look at kpmg.ca if this is a topic that interests you. There are a number of publications related to fiscal sustainability. We started in 2009 in sort of the beginning of the recession, looking at what are other OECD nations doing from a public sector perspective, and we sort of kept the rhythm going with a variety of research papers, some of which we've employed the Economist Intelligence Unit in the U.S. and in the U.K. Some has been research purely Canadian, And I would say we've gotten a fair amount of interest on that. The last publication, Shifting Gears, is from the Mowat School of Government and Public Policy, and they're just about to release another paper that we have sponsored called Shifting Gears 2, which is really more about a Canadian perspective. In those research papers on the next page of the publication, or rather the presentation, you'll see that we believe there are 4 broad areas the government can employ to address fiscal sustainability challenges. Efficiency, probably the number one, program and policy effectiveness, and core service review approach really does fall within that quadrant of taking a look at programs and policies to determine their fiscal sustainability and future mandate. The other quadrant is looking at new public service models such as public-private partnerships, and finally, increasing taxes has always some appeal, but there is a lot of literature, and I would think most consensus among economists that you cannot tax your way out of a fiscal gap in terms of addressing the challenge. So I am going to invite our project manager, Glenn Slutsky, to explain a little bit about core services reviews. Many of you will be familiar with this concept from the 90s with Paul Martin. The federal government certainly did a lot of these, and we've sort of reinterpreted what is a core services review, and that's how we applied it to the City of Toronto. So Glenn, do you want to talk a bit about that?
Thanks, Greg. Core service review, as Craig mentioned, is really a tool in a broad toolkit of mechanisms that governments can employ. And as you saw on the previous page, those tools deal with a variety of spending and revenue areas. This one in particular looks at the services that a jurisdiction provides and takes a critical perspective on what are the must-haves. Those are the services that are required to be provided by whether it's other level of government or legislative contractual requirements. What are then some of the services that are important but are nice to have, and some would classify them as discretionary? They're in place to meet specific community needs or groups or to make cities, jurisdictions, and countries more livable, if you will. In addition to just looking through a core and non-core lens, these reviews also take into account service levels that are being provided to assess whether those are too high and could be reduced potentially to save costs. And they identify opportunities for improvement. There's no recommendations that usually come out of these, but options that are laid on the table for politicians and decision makers to discuss, explore, and hopefully make decisions on to close the fiscal gap that Craig has talked to you about. So from a broader methodological perspective, this is what core services reviews are, and we want to explore that a little bit more today on the example of the City of Toronto and give you a window into the methodology that we employed, how we went about doing that, the challenges and lessons that we picked up from that. You'll get the value and see how that could be applied in your respective jurisdiction. So, some background on the City of Toronto. Most of you are familiar, obviously, with the size and the scope of the municipality that we're dealing with here. But I'm not sure if you know what the size and the magnitude of the gap was. It was estimated that for 2011 it was around $774 million. Contextually, that's about 9% of the overall budget. So it's quite sizable, quite significant, and most of that 74 is actually structural in nature. So it's not one-offs that we cover in this particular year. And so to close that gap, the city has instituted a program, a service review program, that consisted of a number of initiatives, efficiency reviews, core service reviews, pricing reviews, and so on, that they used as a means to close that $774 million gap. So as I said, core service review is just one of the initiatives, a very important one that's at how services that are being provided can be provided better and cheaper and faster. So the objective for us then was to really generate insights about the service to help the council make decisions that need to be made. And sometimes, as you saw over the past few months, those decisions were controversial and highly visible in the media and everywhere else. So the scope of the project really involved a comprehensive review of all the services that the city provides, and those were about 105 services under about 40 programs or so. In addition, the city also wanted us to look at the 50 services or so that are being provided by agencies, boards, and commissions in the area of Toronto, and explicitly in the scope of work that asked us to conduct research and analysis of other comparable municipalities and jurisdictions to see what else is being done with respect to the services that are being provided as well as service level. And as I mentioned, because it was a part of a larger program, efficiency opportunities were outside of the scope of this particular engagement because they were being handled by another stream of work. Detailed articulation of cost savings, just from a practicality perspective, I'll talk about the timing a little bit more. We had 8 weeks to complete the work, so it was not really feasible to analyze cost out from all of the opportunities. We did categorize them on the magnitude of the opportunity, and we'll see that a little bit later in this presentation. And of course, the management decisions on what actions to pursue are the purview of the council, and we're providing information to make those informed decisions. Let's talk about the methodology a little bit more. I mentioned what core services reviews are, and typically in the past, what you'll see is an assessment of services to determine, what is really core and what is non-core. So what's been employed in the past is a binary kind of choice, whether you're above the line of core, wherever that line is established, or below it. And we found that method to be not very productive, first of all, for decision making, but also for gathering information. People get defensive when you talk about non-core or discretionary, and it's just not the most effective way of gathering and analyzing information. So instead, we adopted what's called a core continuum approach, where we plotted several points along that continuum with respect to what is really required or legislated or mandatory, down to what is essential, and all the way down to some of the things that are really community-based or specific organization-based that couldn't be considered to be core. And so that continuum was developed and validated with the city, and our analysis formed the ranking on that continuum, and you'll see that in a couple of slides. Additionally, as I said, we also looked at service levels, and those service levels were analyzed with respect to what is required by legislation, contractual agreements, leading practices, if there's a positive business case to deliver services, those levels, and so on. So those two dimensions, if you will, form the foundation for our analysis. You can see on the next slide, there's a bit more detail on that. So you can see the service core continuum consisted of 4 main points. It doesn't mean that a service needs to be slotted within each one of them. It could be on the boundaries. So it doesn't have to be integer ranking. It could be 3.5 or 2.5, if you will, on core continuum. So you can see on the left side of the box at the bottom is the categories of core. On the top is the service level assessment, and we looked at whether the service is being delivered at standard, below standard, or above standard. And we plotted the services within each program on that particular graph. So you can see in this example, there's about seven services that are plotted within the transportation group. In this case, the size of the circle represents the budget that is being spent on that particular service. And the shading of the circle represents to what degree it's being funded from the municipal tax base. So in this case, winter maintenance is fully fund it from the tax base, whereas utility repair, because you recover some of the fees from utilities for that service, is basically a break-even service. So you can see that gives you a visual perspective of where you're spending your money, to what level that expenditure is core to the city's operation, and where some potential opportunities may reside with respect to lowering service standards to achieve cost savings. We've also done some supplementary analysis to give the council a more holistic perspective on the service. Looked at where the standards arose, whether those are being defined by the council, by management, by funding agreements, and what the role of the city is in delivering that service, whether they're the regulator, funder, manager of the service, whether they deliver the service themselves using city staff, or they contract it out. Again, that's being delivered, what kind of expenditures are involved, and then make a decision on what to do with it. On the basis of that analysis, we formulated a number of opportunities that could be pursued by the council. And so those were formulated on the basis of the core ranking. Those were formulated on the basis of service level, whether those are elevated. And if they are elevated, whether there's an opportunity to reduce those service levels or do things differently through alternate service delivery or re-engineering. And for services that were more discretionary in nature, is it possible to scale down the service, divest of it, eliminate it, stop doing it altogether? So those were all options that are put on the table. In addition, just to framing the options, we also gave a bit more detail to the council with respect to what is the category of potential savings, not necessarily the number that you're expected to generate, but are we looking at a 5% reduction or a 20% reduction potential with the pursuit of that opportunity? So that was an important attribute for the city to understand. What are the risks that are involved in pursuing that option? Who are the stakeholders that are potentially affected? And what are the implications and ramifications of pursuing that option? Timing-wise, can we do it quickly, or will it be a drawn-out process? Certainly a criterion that could drive your decision. If you want to generate savings quickly, you'll pursue those opportunities that could take place in 2012, 2013. If you want more structural change, obviously that's going to take more time. You're looking into a 3 to 5 year horizon. And we also identify to what degree are there barriers to implementing it, whether contractual agreements are in place, union agreements, and so on. So again, degree of the barrier that you have to overcome, certainly a criterion in your decision making. So as you can see, it was a fairly comprehensive analysis. As I mentioned, it took about 8 weeks of work. Some people have asked us the question, how can you do that for 150 services only in 8 weeks? We're going to talk about success factors and what led us to deliver a quality product to the city. But it boils down to having the right people, having the right data, having the right focus and management time on the part of the jurisdiction and attention to this project. Because if it's something that you're doing as part of an initiative off the side of your desk, don't expect it to be done quickly and to the quality standards that one expects. So let's talk about the magnitude of the work. As I mentioned, the overall budget for the city is about $9 billion, broken into clusters, agencies on the left-hand side, so you can see TTC and police taking up the majority of the budget. Also, kind of software services, if you will, and cluster A, employment, shelter support, children's services, so on. Those are the big ticket items there. More of a harder services on cluster B, Toronto Water, Fire, waste management, taking up almost $1 billion altogether. And then supporting services in cluster C and the city manager's office. Those are the shared services, IT, facilities and real estate. And that's how we broke out the work, because the challenges, the possibilities are different within those. The degree of influence is different within those. You may influence your kind of internal services much quicker than you would external patient services, and those that are delivered by agencies and boards and commissions are even more removed from your sphere of influence. So that requires a bit of a different approach. I talked about service mapping being a key component of the work, and I absolutely have to agree. We, as part of our data gathering exercise, received a fairly comprehensive, I'd say overwhelming even, amount of data on the city's services, not only in terms of cost allocation, but also the depth to which the city has gone to identify services, programs, activities types, and so on. So you can see here we've provided a couple of examples of how facilities and real estate is broken out, management and facilities management. Underneath that, there are activities. So you can see facilities management has 4 activities: maintenance, custodial care, and so on. And then each of the activities is broken down into a number of types. So we have to analyze services, believe it or not, at the type level. And the magnitude of the work, again, about 1,400 types altogether. And so 1,400 data points on what the city does, what are the units that it delivers, what are the standards, what are the sources of those standards, and how much it adheres to those set service standards. So the deeper down you went, the more detail you had to go with. So our approach was to aggregate it as much as possible where we could and make decisions at the activity level, not at the type level, because dealing with 1,400 sets of types at the time frame that we had, it's just not feasible. We talked about the core continuum and how we went about determining what is core and what is non-core. I can't say it's a complicated process. We mapped it out for stakeholders to understand and for those that read the support to understand. But all of this to say that you're basically going down some decision notes to see what is core on the basis of several criteria. And if it is, what do you do about that? And if it's not, what do you do about that? And there are various options that present themselves on where you are in the decision tree, and then you pursue those options and you potentially classify them on the basis of cost, risk, barriers, and so on. So, as I said, a comprehensive body of analysis that went into this process, and we wanted to give you just a window of what some of the results or the outputs were. Obviously, we can't present you with the entire fact book. By the way, if you did want to do that, I think it's available on the city's website. But just some of the artifacts that came out of the work. So you can see this is a typical profile for a service. As I mentioned, there's about 150 of these profiles. So the first slide, as you can see in front of you, is kind of a summary of the analysis. Similar box on the right-hand side to what we saw before, where the activities plot on the core continuum, on the service level continuum. Also a rationale for why we ranked the services the way we did. We also included, as I mentioned, because of the scope of work, that the city outlined jurisdictional data that was relevant in conducting the analysis. So we looked at a number of data sources. We also looked at other jurisdictions that are similar size and scope and geography, urban characteristics, and that led us to about 6 cities. I think Montreal, Chicago, Boston, Philadelphia, Barcelona, and Melbourne were the ones that were cited as comparables. And so that analysis factored into the ranking and factored into the opportunities that we identified. And you can see on the left-hand side in the gray bar kind of some of the factual information related to the service. The next page is more granular degree of detail on each of the activities. So you can see activity name. So you can imagine if winter maintenance is one of the 340 activities that was analyzed, just gives you a bit of a perspective on the entire scope of analysis, right? And so you can see in this example, we've analyzed what the costs are from a gross perspective, how much of it is being funded from the tax base, what is the core ranking, what are the service levels, where are the source of the standards coming from, and in this particular example, the city is delivering most of the services related to this particular activity. As I mentioned, we also framed opportunities, and this is what an opportunities table looks like. Identification of risks and implications, savings, time frames, and barriers are all contained herein. So doing this work on a service-by-service, activity-by-activity basis, we were able to develop some fairly sophisticated analytics that looked at the city as a whole. And so in this particular example, you can see how all of the services that are being delivered by the city break down by the core continuum. So you can see in terms of mandatory services that are being provided, and those are the ones that are required by higher order of government. There's about $5 billion that are being provided by the city, and that's the number that I'm looking at right here. Essential constitutes about $3.2 billion, and you can see traditional and other as a sum is about $750 million, purely coincidental, by the way, with the size of the fiscal gap that the city is facing. So on the distribution of cost by service level, you can see most of the services that are being provided are delivered at standard, and there's about $1.5 billion worth of services that are being provided somewhat above prescribed standard. On the next slide, it's clear. Next slide, you can see breakdown graphically. I don't know if you can read that in the presentation, but we plotted again where the costs are in the four largest services that are being delivered. That's transportation, employment services, shelter and housing, and police, I believe. That's right. There's two of the four big. Then there's the 500 million to 1 billion services on the right-hand side, and then the rest of the services plotted below. As you can see, the shading really indicates what is discretionary and what is core. The big-ticket items all appear to be largely core or essential to the city. Budgetary items like theaters, like the zoo, like the environment office, and because those were ranked more discretionary, you probably heard more about them during the debates that took place over the summer. So we wanted to talk about some of the lessons learned and key success factors that we identified as part of the work, and broke them down into kind of do's and don'ts if you were to pursue something similar in your jurisdiction. Do's, probably number one, have a clearly articulated case for change. What is the burning platform that is driving the work? And in the case of Toronto, obviously the size of the magnitude of the fiscal gap. 9% of the budget is fairly significant. That lit a fire under people, obviously sparked a change in government philosophy that was brought in with the new council back in the fall of 2010, and that really ignited the push to do this work. From a contractual perspective, dealing with a consultant, have a well-defined scope of work. Because of the size and the magnitude and the depth of analysis is so broad, you can go down so many rabbit holes, so many tangents, that it's really hard to elevate yourself up back to the municipal level or provincial level and to see the big picture, if you will. So if you have a well-defined scope of work, you're more likely to succeed than if you're trying to cover a waterfront with a very deep degree of analysis. Involve departmental management. although we brought an independent perspective to the process, we couldn't have done it without folks that are close to the services, those are the senior management, general managers, directors, and sometimes managers that conduct the work. They gave us some insights, gave us justification to some degree why a service fell on a certain side of the core ranking continuum, and without that, I think that would have been a much more sterile analysis. Prepare for the project. As we mentioned, data that was gathered by the city of the last 2 or 3 years was instrumental in completing the analysis. Also look at your communications. What is it that you're going to be doing to kind of mitigate the media exposure? What are you going to be doing to mitigate some of the employee questions that may pop up in your particular jurisdiction? And have a fiscal strategy overall. As I mentioned, the City of Toronto had a program that addressed the gap rather than have a one-off review. So if you're much more likely to succeed as part of a broader push rather than isolated set of initiatives. In terms of jurisdictional research, we would advise you to focus a bit more. If you want to look at a number of jurisdictions, you're only going to scratch the surface because you can't really go deep if you're looking into many jurisdictions. So choose comparators wisely, pick fewer comparators, and go deeper into each one of them to understand what is it that they're doing, what the service levels are. This is, I think it's self-explanatory, but this is a complicated analysis. It involves a multitude of stakeholders, and so if you're looking for an easy solution, I don't think there is one, and I think the research that Craig has talked about proves that fact. It's a structural problem, and it needs a structural solution. And so I think the expectation needs to be set that it's a long road to recovery, if you will. Don't underestimate the voice of affected stakeholders. Lots of people rely on city services, and reducing, cutting, or eliminating services will impact them, and they will make their voices heard, justifiably so. Some social programs that municipalities provide are vital to some of the community groups, and those community groups will be affected, and you'll hear from them as part of the process. And one of my favorite kinds of fiction, take advantage of the problem's going to grow bigger rather than be solved on its own. And finally, key success factors. What are some of the necessary things that you need to succeed, and some of the desired things? Necessary, we found that the collaboration between ourselves and the city was very close and was very productive, and that was one of the key things that led to the documents being fruitful and valuable to the city. It is really, given the timelines that we have and given the depth of analysis we have to go to, there's really no room for disagreement or discord. Everybody has to work as a team and to be on the same page with respect to where you want to get to. I mentioned briefly in passing investment of time and attention. If this is something that you're trying to do as part of a SLI project, it will likely fail. You need to give it attention. You need to put it at the forefront of your agenda at the executive level and give it the attention that it deserves. And we believe that absolutely necessary is a credible and objective perspective. You need a third-party, independent look at what is it that you do. Otherwise, you're going to be stuck in the same loop of doing the same old thing and turning over the same old stones without really looking at things broadly from a holistic perspective. And also it provides credibility to the work product and diffuses some of the criticism that you may receive for the work. Some things that are desired but may not be necessarily critical, if you will. Politically ready and open-minded council in the City of Toronto case, that's certainly the case. You can see the council is open to making tough choices, and some of the other jurisdictions that may not be the case. But you can do the analysis without having the council make tough decisions. You can, doing a review of your services, we've heard time and time again from the City of Toronto, is a good business practice. And whether you're doing it to close a fiscal gap or whether you're doing it just to check that things are running smoothly in your municipality, there are certainly benefits to attacking the problem both ways. And comprehensive service data, we realized that Toronto was likely at the forefront of gathering service data and almost going down to the type level to identify costs, and other jurisdictions may not have that degree of granularity. So although it's nice and desired to have that cost data available for review, sometimes you can rely on the budgetary figures that are readily available in most jurisdictions to understand the materiality of services, and not necessarily go down to the granular level of activities and types and so on. So that's from our perspective has been the project, the methodology, the things that we've learned from it on our side, and we're more than happy to answer most of your questions in the remaining, 20 minutes. If you do have further questions that you want to address offline, or reach out to us, our information is here. Call either or email Craig or I, and we'll be more than happy to chat to you about the Toronto project or any issues that you may be experienced in your own municipality, and give you guidance on having something like that in your own city or province or country. There's somebody overseas on the call. So at this point in time, we want to open it up to questions, and Robert, Guy, if you've got any that are coming through the chat window, I'm more than happy to take them at this point.
Thanks very much, Craig and Glenn. Just a quick comment. I imagine that the pictures you showed us were the before the process pictures. At the end, as you were coming at the end of that grueling couple of months, I'm not so sure you guys would have had such beaming smiles, but anyway, thank you for the presentation. We do have our first question, and it comes, I think you sort of touched on it, but maybe a little bit more detail. So it goes, it appears that the city had solid definitions of their services before your arrival. If they didn't, what would KPMG recommend would be the most effective way for them to define their services?
It's a good question, and maybe Guy, you'll augment our question given your depth and involvement in this. But I think we would start from just the budgets that are available. What is it that you're spending your money on? That will give us a window on the Pareto, if you will, 80-20 rule. Where is it that the opportunities reside? You don't want to tackle the smallest budget items, because if you make changes there, you want to look at where you're spending your money. And if it's a departmental breakdown, and that's the best that you've got, I think you can start the process by looking at those figures.
Great. Second question, and it's as follows. You talked about a well-defined scope of work. What would be well-defined or not well-defined?
Well, I think the City of Toronto has, defined the deliverables, let's say. So they were clear as to what was the end result that they were seeking, and we worked with them then to look at what we would embark on in terms of analysis and research in order to fulfill those deliverables. So really getting agreement up front on the end product and what would go into its creation was helpful in sort of elaborating on the scope that the city had identified. I guess poorly defined scope would simply be the reverse of that. You could spend a lot of time trying to accurately quantify the potential savings. You could spend a lot of time looking at the social and economic consequences. None of those items were on our scope. There was a big appetite on the part of both the councillors and the public, I would say, to have that information. And, I think that it's ultimately the political process that helped provide that information.
Thank you. The questions are coming in fast and furious, so we'll do as many as we can get through here in the next few minutes. But here's the next one. After the service review is complete, is the information maintained and revised as part of continuous service improvement? Are the analytics captured in a tool that allows for what-if analysis?
The city has certainly expressed interest in maintaining that information. The parts are now theirs, but time and time again we've heard from the city manager's office that there's value in continuing the work. And even if you don't do it on a continuous basis, you do it on a periodic basis. So what does it look like? What does the core service review 2012 look like? Has anything changed? Where did expenditures go up? Where did revenues go down? And the landscape may have changed. And so there's definitely interest on the part of the city to continue this kind of work, probably internally to some degree, because now they have all the tools and the templates to do that. We've also provided them with a data model that was driving the analytics, and so if they want to update it with next year budget, view it as a live document going forward.
Okay, next question. Recognizing that there is a deficit and reductions need to be made, was an analysis done of the cost of longer-term impacts of certain service reductions or eliminations?
So I think that's something that Craig has touched on. The impacts of reducing a service are obviously more than financial, right? And so you're providing a service to fill community needs, to cater to a specific audience or to the broad audience with the city as a whole. And by reducing, changing, eliminating the service, you're going to have those impacts. And those impacts may actually be greater than the savings that you're going to accumulate in the short term. We acknowledge that, and I think everybody understands that. We haven't done the quantification of that because there's so many variables that can go into deciding what the impact of reducing the tree canopy could be, for example, in the city of Toronto with all the environmental implications and the comfort of the city lifestyle. Do they have to be taken into account? Absolutely. Is that something that the council could request the city manager or the city staff to do to further analyze the impact? Absolutely. Do they have to take that into account later on when they make the decision on the service changes? We believe that they do. But doing it as part of this exercise will completely bog you down, and you can get caught in analyzing a handful of services to the greatest degree possible, and then dismiss everything else because that's where most of your it's going to go.
Next question. Would you have liked more time, or do you think it's best to undertake this type of the review very quickly?
I think the time provided was adequate given the scope of work that was required. A painting is never finished, but we had a large and capable team on it. We had a very collaborative client who was ready for us, and so I thought that the time frame was ambitious, but was doable.
Next question starts with versus.
So as I mentioned, as part of the overall program, the city has also undertaken other initiatives, and one of the initiatives was a public consultation series. So there was a series of maybe a dozen meetings held all over the city to gather input from citizens on what services they value, what services they believe are core and necessary to them. And so, unfortunately, due to the timing, that process
survey, right?
That's right. That's a survey online that was conducted. Fortunately, the process was concurrent with our review, and by the time we were coming up with our conclusions and options, that process was wrapping up. We were hoping to do that, and I think the council, when they were debating some of these options that were on the table, already had that information through a parallel process. But we, through our work, didn't get a chance to incorporate it into the analysis.
I would say our process was really all about a pure lens of cost saving. And an agreed framework around criteria and so on. So, that kind of was what made the scope doable in a couple of months. Obviously, very important services, very important to a lot of Torontonians, things like, child care, parks and rec, long-term care homes. And so, we thought that there was certainly a rich argument to take place, or a rich debate at the political level to really inform those ultimate choices. And ours was really, this look through a lens of, if you were looking only at cost savings, what's core and non-core, and what service levels might you reduce? The literature, the OECD, most economists would agree that the best way of saving money is to stop doing something, to stop programs, to stop service levels. That's sort of an enduring, sustainable way of saving costs. So that was frankly the lens that we kept looking through.
Thanks very much, Craig. Next question, somewhat related, but I'll leave it with you. And I guess for those of us who are not in and around the GTA, this might be a good question. So what action is or has the City of Toronto taken as a result of this review? Specifically, are they discontinuing services, re-engineering services, etc.? Did they achieve the savings to bridge the gap?
So, although we were deep in the thick of things in July when they were debating these particular options, the process obviously went on without us into September, and I think into October. And the council had several meetings. I think September 26th was a key date where they explored these options further and actually decided to make changes to services that are now to somewhere around $60 million mark. So obviously not closing the entire gap, but making headway into it. I think last week we saw the decision to make certain the delivery changes to waste and I guess garbage and recycling management. So they're making those changes, I think service by service, department by department. They haven't taken a kind of a fire hose and started chopping services as of yet. But I think one of the phrases that we've heard used, the physics of the budgeting process dictate that you got to close the gap somehow, and I think those decisions are still being made at the council chamber.
Thanks, Glenn. Even those of us in different parts of the country are hearing about it. It's causing, there are various media reports that have circulated in the last couple of days. Interesting that it's definitely still front and center. Somewhat related is a question that we received. What are your impressions of making the final report public?
I think it really enhances accountability and transparency. So I think that there's value in that. These services are valuable to all Torontonians and be downloaded. There was a lot of participation in the council meetings by residents of Toronto. So I would think, back to, these services should not be looked at only with a cost-saving lens. That was our job. It's the community and the council that has that information in their hands to add their perspective to it.
Here's another question we just received. Given the public controversy, does KPMG have any reservations about having taken on this work?
It's certainly a challenging project. I would say that we were pleased with the results. We were pleased with the relationship that we had with the city. We certainly viewed it as a very high-risk assignment, and to mitigate that, really plan carefully the work and the quality of the deliverables that went forward. So I would say we're certainly very, very proud of the outcome, and I think we've received very good feedback from city officials around, sort of the seminal nature of the products and amalgamation. They haven't really had the luxury of exposing the facts surrounding services and opportunities.
Okay, we have time for a couple more, maybe one or two more questions, and I'll tell you, gentlemen, that we're getting a lot of questions, but we'll do our best to get to the last couple. From one of the a question from somebody representing one of the larger cities in Canada, but not Toronto. What roles and how big was the KPMG team and the internal City of Toronto team?
Size of the team, I'd say we had maybe 8 folks involved on a pretty much full-time basis. So it took a lot of effort, as Craig mentioned. We identified that as a high-risk plan for it, staffed it appropriately, and because of the short timeline, you just had to put lots of resources onto it. From the city manager's office, we had the project manager that was full-time dedicated to this, but we also have the attention of the city manager, the deputy city managers, and pretty much all the general managers involved in the process of steering committee meetings virtually weekly, and lots of workshops with senior management, lots of interviews with senior management. And so I can't say the numbers exactly involved in the city side, but the reach was quite extensive.
Okay, gentlemen. What we'll do, if you don't mind, is we know who sent us the question, so if we could capture these and pass along. There's about 5 or 6 other questions. A couple are just very specific. We'll pass those along, and if it's okay, you can provide a response, and we'll get those back to the people that asked, if that's okay. And I'd like to sum up and say again a great big thank you to Craig and Glenn for the time they put into preparing the presentation, for giving us, I think, an amazing amount of insight on the process. And for those of us in the service mapping community, a really great example of how the work that jurisdictions have been undertaking to do service mapping, to define services, define costs related to those services, was really instrumental in helping present a very good picture of options for decision makers. So with that, a huge thank you, and a huge thank you to everybody who participated. And just the last thing I will say is that a recording of this session has been made and will be available for download on the ICCS website. So for those of you who want to share it with colleagues, that will be one of the ways of doing it. And with that, I'm going to say thank you to the ICCS team, and I wish everybody a really good day. Thanks.